Hey guys, we've already discussed many times all the difficulties that come up when working with grey hair. But judging by the comments, there are still some questions left. So why is it that sometimes grey hair doesn't get colored? The first, and as you understand, the most important thing is the choice of dye. If you want your grey hair to be covered 100%, you need to choose a dye that is capable of doing that. Grey hair will never be fully covered if you use a semi-permanent dye, a blonde dye that isn't specifically designed for grey hair, or a clear toning dye. All of these dyes are physically incapable of covering grey hair 100%. The second factor is the choice of developer. If you use a developer with a lower percentage than required for grey hair, according to the brand's technology you're working with, the dye won't penetrate as deeply into the hair structure as it should, and you'll end up with incomplete coverage. The grey hair will reflect light and partially show through. And if the developer percentage is higher than what the technology requires, then the coloring result will be warmer than you expected. As a result, you will end up with a color error. Always follow the instructions. If the instructions for a professional dye, for example Igora Royale, state that the minimum developer percentage for working with grey hair is 6%, then for this brand, it must be 6%. Another brand might require only 3%, but usually such a low percentage is used only for toning or grey hair camouflage. The third reason why grey hair might not take the color is that you applied an insufficient amount of dye. If you use too little dye when coloring grey hair, don't expect 100% coverage. Imagine you have a white wall, that is grey hair, and you have 2 cans of paint. The first can holds 2 liters, the second holds half a liter. Well, with which can will you be able to paint the wall properly? Of course, if you try to spread half a liter of paint over the wall, there will definitely be spots left unpainted. Fourth, it's quite possible that the grey hairs didn't get colored because you mixed the dye with the developer for too long. You should mix the dye with the developer for 30 to 60 seconds. If you keep mixing longer and longer, the amount of ammonia needed for proper coverage of grey hair evaporates. As a result, the hair doesn't swell enough for the pigments to penetrate to the necessary depth, and the pigments form in the more superficial layers of the hair, which again leads to incomplete coverage. Fifth, the thickness of the strand during coloring. Take thin strands, about 3 to 5 millimeters. If you take a wide strand, it's quite possible that the dye will be applied on both sides, but only on the outside of the strand, while the inside remains uncolored. Sixth, a very important point is the processing time of the dye. Even if you did everything correctly according to the previous points, but the processing time was not the maximum recommended for your dye, the pigments will not have enough time to fully develop within the structure of the grey hair. Seventh, you should start coloring grey hair exactly from the area where there are the most grey hairs. What we color first will be covered best. And finally, the eighth point, it's important what you use to wash out the dye. A shampoo for colored hair is ideal, as well as a special line for grey and mature hair with coenzyme Q10. I do not recommend washing out the dye with a deep cleansing shampoo, even if you want to clean the scalp as thoroughly as possible after coloring. Almost every colorist has many clients with grey hair. These are our regular and most frequent clients. That's why the quality of our work determines both the color result and our financial outcome.